to present to you the third Columbia County Virtual Housing Forum. Today, we will hear from some of the state, regional, and local housing practitioners and professionals the county is collaborating with, as well as we respond to our housing challenges. I would also like to thank the Economic Development Corporation for hosting today's forum. CEDC's leadership continues to highlight the link between affordable housing and economic development. Today's forum builds upon the foundation of the 2022 Columbia County Housing Brief, developed by the Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. The Housing Brief was presented in March of 2022 at our inaugural housing forum and sparked a wider conversation about how the county and its towns, villages, and city could respond to the challenges at hand. In the last 3 years, the county and its partners have enacted many of the recommendations and strategies discussed at the first forum. The County Board of Supervisors created the Columbia County Housing Task Force, comprised of 12 members representing communities throughout the area and supported by a 10-person advisory board composed of local and regional housing experts. Next, the Board of Supervisors worked with the Columbia County Economic Development Corporation to hire a housing development coordinator. Chris Brown joined CEDC in January of 2023 to steer the task force's work and assist the county's communities with their own efforts. Chris will be moderating today's conversation with our esteemed guests. Responding to another recommendation from the inaugural forum, the County Board of Supervisors then created the Columbia County Land Bank Corporation. The Land Bank is a New York State public authority and a 501c3 not-for-profit organization empowered to acquire vacant, abandoned, and tax delinquent parcels and return them to productive use. The Land Bank has since received operational and capital funds from New York State Homes and Community Renewal, and intends to complete its first acquisitions within the coming months. Most recently, Columbia County became the first and so far the only county in New York State to reach 100% enrollment in the New York State Pro-Housing Communities Program. All 23 of the county's municipalities will soon be able to access state funds totaling $750 million. Funds tied to programs that address not just housing needs, but infrastructure, economic development, tourism, and more. These achievements reflect the county's response to our housing challenges as we continue to focus on and strengthen collaboration and coordination throughout and between our communities. As our strategies evolve and take shape, it is important to keep an eye on the larger picture and to remain aware of the current housing and demographic trends, best practices from which we can learn, and possible legislative paths to consider. Today, we are lucky to be joined by a group of panelists whose expertise in these areas have been invaluable to the county. They are Adam Bosch, Executive Director of Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress, Kevin O'Connor, CEO of RUPCO, and Madeline Fletcher, Vice President of the Small to Mid-Sized Development at New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Finally, Chris Brown will provide an update on the Housing Task Force, highlighting their accomplishments, as well as the goals of the coming year. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers and welcoming Chris to kick off the event.
All right, thank you, Chairman Morrell. Yes, and welcome to everybody, speakers, friends, and neighbors. I'm not going to take up too much of your time at the top here, but I do want to do a little bit of level setting and expectation setting. Number one, and most importantly, if you've got any questions, you can either choose to post them in chat, the public chat, where everyone can see your question, or you can just go into chat and then choose my name from the drop-down menu and just send questions directly to me. I'll be keeping an eye on that while our panelists are going through their presentations. And we'll have probably about 30 to 45 minutes, I think, 45 minutes on the high side, for questions and answers following the presentations. The first of the presentations is mine, so bear with me while I pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. It just looks like a title card. Thank you, Adam. So tonight's agenda, nobody has seen these titles, so these will be news to our panelists, but I think they're pretty jaunty. I'm going to be talking about expectations, definitions, and some market data that's specific to Columbia County and trying to contextualize it somewhat. Adam will provide wider regional context and some new research that he and his team down at Pattern for Progress have been working on. Kevin O'Connor, the CEO of RUPCO, who's here tonight, will talk about some of the impediments and expedients that developers face, especially when they're trying to build housing in rural areas where infrastructure is very hard to come by. And then Madeline Fletcher from Homes and Community Renewal will speak to us about Right for Rural state programs. So these are state subsidy programs that make sense for smaller rural communities. These are smaller development patterns, smaller amounts of minimum units, the things that our towns and villages are really looking for. So some housing term refreshers before we get started. These are going to come up probably a lot tonight, and if you don't talk about them every day, it's easy to forget what they are. And sometimes if you do talk about them every day, it's easy to forget what they are. AMI is short for Area Median Income. This is something that's determined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In New York State, for the most part, in our rural areas, this maps onto counties. So all of Columbia County has the same area median income, and it changes based on household size. So here I've just listed the 100%, which is sort of the default AMI, 100% for each of the household sizes between 1 and 5 family members. The one that we really want to pay attention to is the second one. The average household size in Columbia County is 2.1 household members. So that AMI is 90,000 and some change for 100%. Housing cost burden is another thing that we want to keep in mind. So this is the 30% rule. This basically states if any household is spending more than 30% of their gross monthly income on their housing costs, and it's all of their housing costs, right? So this is rent or mortgage, plus insurance, utilities. If you're spending more than 30% of your gross income on that, you're considered housing cost burden. Conversely, affordable housing, which goes by many different perceived and received definitions, but the one that we're going to use tonight is housing that doesn't housing cost burden you. So this is housing that does not cost more than 30% of a given household's gross monthly income. And then the last one is a word that I hope we do not hear too much of tonight, solutions. We aren't here to talk about solutions because we aren't here to try to solve the housing crisis. If we did, we'd be the first people to do that on the face of the planet in world history. So what we'll talk about instead are strategies, initiatives, policies. I like to use the term mitigation, but we are not here to talk about solutions. Okay, this is a lot of information right off the bat, but this is some level setting. These are the average local wages for a variety of all the industries that are listed by the New York State Department of Labor's website. It shows you, this chart will show you how many establishments there are, what the average employment is in each of these industries, the percentage of all the jobs in the county this represents. And again, these are jobs in the county. So rather than folks who live in the county that have jobs wherever, these are literally just the jobs within Columbia County. And before anyone asks, I can't see the chat, but yes, all of these slides will be available after the meeting on CEDC's website. So this is broken into various color-coded tranches here. Red being the lowest of the AMI range, which is below 50% or below. Then orange is 60, yellow is 80%, so on and so forth. This will be a little clearer on the next slide. This tells you what percentage of local jobs are within each of those AMI bands. So about 13.5% of all of our jobs pay below 50% of AMI. This is broadly retail jobs, food service jobs. And then 60% comes in at 60% of AMI comes in at a little under 29% of all jobs. This last column is important. So that's the percentage of all jobs. Running just really means additive as we go up. So what you end up with is that 100% band, that 100% of area median income. 88% of all the jobs in Columbia County pay at or below 100% of that AMI level. This is an interesting statistic that I just kind of derived within the past week or so. A lot of people have expressed some alarm at this. I was one of them when I came up with this statistic. There are 62 counties in New York State. There are 12 counties where a two-person household earning 120% of the AMI, so doing quite a bit better than the average. So even at that 120% AMI level, a two-person household cannot afford the mortgage on a home that is at the median sales price in their county, or whatever their MSA is for their AMI. Now that does assume a 3.5% down payment, which is low. That's as low as you can get and still get an FHA-backed mortgage. But it also assumes no other monthly debts, no credit card debt, no student loan debt, no childcare. So this is pretty conservative. So of those 12 counties where that two-person household can't afford that median sales price home, 6 of those are in New York City and Long Island, kind of the New York City MSA area, and 6 of them are upstate. One of those is Saratoga County. The other 5 are in what we can consider the larger Mid-Hudson Valley region. There are 9 counties that Adam's team at Pattern for Progress focuses on. It's kind of the broader Mid-Hudson Valley region. So 5 of those counties are in the Mid-Hudson Valley. Of the 6 that aren't in the New York City area, there is still one county where that household, if they were to save 20% of the down payment for the median home price, they still cannot afford the median sale price home, can't afford that monthly mortgage, and that's Columbia County. So even within the broader housing crisis that exists globally, nationally, regionally, at the state level, and in our subregion, we are still an outlier. One of the other pieces of that is once you get down to that level where you're making that 20% down payment, 3 of the New York City counties fall off. So Columbia County is not only the only upstate county where that household cannot afford a median price home, it's one of only 4 counties statewide where that's true. Okay. This is a graphic representation of what I was just telling you. So those are the 5 counties outside of the New York City area, and that's the affordability gap for that home if they put down 3.5%. And then if you put down 20%, it's just Columbia County outside of New York City that cannot afford that home. This is our rental market. So these color bands follow the color bands that we saw earlier from the local jobs and the wages that they pay. These are a number of units that are available at certain price points, at certain income levels, as of 5 days ago. So this is information that I pulled from Zillow, not the only rental source, but a pretty good source of available rental units. So you can see that at the lowest band, for 60% and below, there's just one apartment available, and there are close to 4,300 jobs that pay at that income level. Obviously, people will double up, but even doubling up a 4,300 to 1 ratio is clearly not ideal. It gets a little better as you go up, but even at the top range where you're talking about 101 to 110% of AMI, that's all inclusive. So those 33 units are the 33 units that are available all the way down, right? So those would be rentals that are priced in between that low and high end of the monthly income, but it also includes all the rentals kind of pushing down the income list. So if you're at 110% AMI and you can't find a $2,000 apartment, but you can find a $1,500 one, you might take that, and now that's one less unit for somebody at the 60 to 80% of AMI level. This is continuing the rental market trend. So the previous slide was for a 1-person household. This is for a 2-person household. So this is 2 renters at those AMI limits, and even at the upper end, if you've got 2 people and their household earns between that 100 and 110% of AMI, there are only 67 rentals available. And again, this is county-wide. In the 686 square miles that comprise Columbia County, there are 67 units county-wide that people could avail themselves of. And it's not on the slides. I didn't want to overburden you too much with information. 89% of the rental units in Columbia County are in the city of Hudson. So that's a lot of bad news. And here are the things that we're doing about it that are not solutions, but are initiatives, some of the initiatives. Since the 2022 Housing Forum, as Chairman Morrell mentioned at the outset, the Board of Supervisors created the Housing Task Force, which has been meeting regularly since March of 2023. The Board of Supervisors created the Housing Development Coordinator position at CEDC. That's yours truly. And I've been coming into this office since January of 2023, so just about 3 years now. At the very end of 2023, we created, between CEDC and the Board of Supervisors, created the Columbia County Land Bank Corporation, both a 501c3 and a New York State public authority. There are now 31 of these land bank corporations scattered across New York State. They are increasingly rural and increasingly focused on affordable housing issues. CEDC also was the fiscal sponsor for the Trillium Community Land Trusts. Land banks are really focused on acquiring property for public use. Community land trusts are really focused on turning that property into perpetually affordable housing on behalf of the community. There's a lot of research and a lot of data out there that areas that are serviced by both a land bank and a CLT can make some real changes in their local housing markets. Pro-housing community certification, Chairman Morrell also mentioned that. The very last resolution that we needed to have all of our communities about to be certified was just passed last week. So now the ball is in the state's court. All of these communities are ready to be certified. Not only will we be the first community or the first county in the state to have all of its communities certified, we're also the first and so far only county that has all of its communities just enrolled in the program, full stop. Also, since the 2022 Housing Forum, we've worked with RUPCO on the +1 ADU program. The first round of that saw 14 families across the county receive up to $125,000 in grant funds to site accessory dwelling units on their property. There's currently a second round. Applications are still being received and reviewed by RUPCO. So if you know anyone who's interested, they can certainly still apply. And also along with RUPCO is the Vacant Rental Improvement Program. This is another state program, and Madeline will talk about this a little bit during her presentation. And this is to deliver rental units in buildings that had been vacant, that are, again, these can be scattered. They don't need to be owned by a nonprofit or even managed by a nonprofit. They can be just vacant buildings that their owners would like to see returned to productive use. So here's what's coming up. The Columbia County Land Bank will be acquiring its first, at least first parcel, possibly parcels, late this year or early next year. And these parcels are already slated for collaborative affordable housing projects with some of our partners. The same can be said for the Trillium Community Land Trust. Every day gets a little bit closer to acquiring its first parcel or first property. It has a few in mind. Again, this would be a perpetually affordable housing opportunity. The pro-housing community certification, as I said, every municipality will be certified sometime within the next 3 to 4 weeks. We have already seen one project taking advantage of the fact that it's sited in a pro-housing certified community. That's the adaptive reuse of the JLE school here in Hudson for affordable senior housing. That developer is availing themselves of infrastructure funding that they would not have been able to access without the pro-housing certification. There's also a technical assistance grant that all of our towns and villages in the city can avail themselves of that is up to $250,000 for a variety of uses. And there will be another round of the Vacant Rental Improvement Program that I believe the state is releasing most likely next month. And for that, we'll be partnering with our friends at Galvin. Galvin Housing Resources will be the local program administrator for the second round. And a few things that the Housing Task Force will be working on coming up next year. Contractor connections. So this is something that we are partnering with RUPCO on. One of the issues that we're running into with some of the state programs is that a lot of our contractors are sole proprietors and don't have the requisite insurance that the state would like you to have in order to access their grant programs. And Columbia County is kind of an outlier in that regard. There are other rural counties out there that also have very rural and sole proprietor sort of slanted contractor workforce that still access these grant programs. So we're going to figure out what the missing connection there is and take care of that so that our local workforce can basically be employed by these state programs. The next one is reclaiming our neighborhoods. This is a bit of a that's a working title, we'll say. I do like that the acronym is RON, since that's one of our Housing Task Force co-chairs. So it might stay that way. So this is returning vacant and abandoned properties to productive life, which is what land banks are tasked to do, but land banks can really only work with the properties that they can get their hands on. So this would be a survey of vacant buildings throughout the county in various towns and villages, and then figuring out what are the barriers to getting these properties back online. The last one, organized philanthropy. There's quite a bit of local altruism that is, I would say, in a potential stage right now, scattered throughout the county. A lot of housing committees, a lot of folks that have resources that are just looking for ways and avenues to put those resources to use. We're going to make a really concerted effort next year to help those folks achieve those dreams, because it would help us with our goals as well. And a little bit later, Kevin O'Connor from RUPCO, we'll be able to speak to one almost fully realized version of this down in Shandaken, where a very historic hotel is being reutilized as a mixed-use development, including affordable housing. So that is it for me. I'm about to turn it over to our presenters. Again, if any questions come up throughout the presentations, you can put them in chat, whether it's public or just private to me. That's all I've got for now. So our first panelist requires no introduction, but is going to get one anyway. Adam Bosch has been to all of these forums. He's been to various housing task force meetings, and he's come to various Board of Supervisors meetings. We've gone down to Pattern for Progress events. Pattern for Progress is the preeminent research and data production institution and organization for the Mid-Hudson Valley region. And Adam's team has been working on some really interesting new research. And so tonight, he's here to update us on some more of the bad news, but also a lot of the good news, and then give us a preview of a really exciting project they've been working on. So take it away, Adam.
All right. Thanks, everybody. It's nice to be with you in 2 dimensions. I always like it when I can be with you in 3 dimensions, but tonight we'll go through Zoom. So I'm going to go through this presentation as quickly as I possibly can. I'm going to try not to repeat some of the things Chris said. I'm also going to try to zip through some of the stuff you've heard from me in the past, although where we have new data, I want to underscore that. And we do have a lot of things in here that are very, very important for you municipal officials out there to be paying attention to as we see the way that local governments are becoming more active, county governments are becoming more active. I want you to see some of these things that are happening around the region so that you all can ask yourselves, what should we be replicating at scale for my town in Columbia County or for the county as a whole? So we've been doing lots of work, as Chris mentioned, on this topic. All the reports you see on this slide are related to housing in some way, shape, or form, either the state of housing, trends in housing, or tactics that you can employ to improve your housing outlook in your town. So Chris gave a preview of this. We released the new data today. These data were literally released less than 8 hours ago. When Chris talks about Columbia County being the only county where a 2-person household with 20% down still cannot afford the cost of a median priced home, understand that that's a combination of 2 things. One is that you have seen proportionally the second biggest increase in housing costs in this region after Sullivan County. If you told me in the 1990s growing up at the Hudson Valley that Columbia would have a median price higher than Orange and Dutchess County, I would have sent you to a couple doctors I know, but that's where we are now. And at the same time, you know, your average incomes are not as high as some of these other places. So as a consequence of that, when you actually break down the numbers, you have statistically the worst housing stress in the region in Columbia County. Okay, it's just a statistical fact. This one in particular means that housing is not just out of reach for your neighbors who don't already own a home. It's in a whole nother zip code. I mean, it's really, really far out of reach. And we did break this down earlier this year in our latest out of reach report. You all have seen this chart in the past. The bars here represent if you went down to the local bank today with a perfect credit score, how much mortgage could you access for a 1-person household, a 2-person household, and a 4-person household. And this last bar is the amount of mortgage you would need to access to buy the median priced home that's on the market right now. So Chris pointed out this gap between 2 and 4, right? This is a 2-person household. Not only is that the close to the typical household in your county, but we also see that as sort of like the classic first-time home buyer market is usually, 2 spouses, 2 people living together, 2 newlyweds, whatever the setup is, right? This gap is very, very big. And if you want to think of it, that's sort of visually just how far out of reach home ownership is for your neighbors who don't already have it. Okay. Now, what that does in turn is it means we have a heck of a lot more people who are out there right now in the rental market, looking for rentals, persisting in the rental market. That pushes rents up over time. You've heard me say this year after year. And I just wanted to share the latest year of data. We continue to see rents going up at a rate that's higher than renter wages. It's been on about a 2-to-1 ratio over the years, rent going up proportionally twice as fast as renter wages. It's been more like 3 or 4 times in recent years. That does have a little to do with more folks retiring and being on Social Security in some of our counties as a proportion of the entire renter market. But this is something worth watching. At a very basic level, this means that rent is gobbling up a greater proportion of people's take-home pay, which means they have a harder time paying for other essentials like transportation and food and healthcare, which means that they have a really, really hard time of paying for things like going out to dinner or buying furniture or doing things that make the consumer economy go round. So we do worry about the high cost of housing becoming a drag on the broader regional economy vis-a-vis people just having no dough to spend. Okay, this is really, really important. Now, the other thing I want to underscore is now this is your 4-person household. Chris used the AMI for a 2-person household, but I do just want to underscore you've been one of the counties that have seen a pretty significant jump in AMI over the past few years. Some of that is your upper 40% of earners getting some pretty good pay raises. Some of it is about 5 to 6% of your population turned over with the northward migration of people into Columbia County who brought with them much higher incomes. But what we've seen, again, if you want to think of this like a math problem, like a fraction, if AMI is the denominator in that thing Chris was showing you, 80% of AMI, 60% of AMI, it's important to understand that the typical renter in your county has seen their wages stagnate relative to inflation. So when you have AMI going up, when your denominator goes up, but your numerator stays stagnant, what you end up with is your typical renter is then making a lower percent of the AMI over time. We did a special project for CEDC for the Hudson IDA earlier this year. We found a huge number of people who just 15 years ago were making about 80% AMI in Hudson are now making closer to 50% of AMI, not because they're making less money, but because the people living around them who've come into the county are making much more. High earners have seen big raises. And so that same level of income means that proportionally, you're not making as much as the people living around you. And so that AMI level is dipping and dipping and dipping. And I think Kevin will probably talk a little bit about, man, it's really hard to develop housing that drives that deep into the trough of affordability to meet those people at 50%, 40%, 30%. And Chris showed you that's a big, big chunk of your workforce in Columbia County. I also just want to underscore this. This is really important for the supervisors and mayors out there who have people come to the planning board, people come to the town board and say, why should we be in favor of housing? Or I don't want to lose the rural character, or this or that. It's really important to understand that there are at this moment more factors pulling on housing than ever in the history of the region. There's second homes, there's short-term rentals, there's the fact that a lot of our towns are losing a pretty big percentage of our stock to dilapidation and disrepair. there's corporate home ownership, there's work from home, there's all kinds of things. All those things I just mentioned take some proportion of the housing stock out of circulation, so to speak, for people who both live and work in your community. But one of the biggest drivers of housing demand is simply the shrinking size of the average family. And I know this may be counterintuitive, but if you think of it again in the terms of, say, Germantown, let's say 100 people lived in Germantown 10 years ago, and every family was in families of 5. You would need 20 housing units to house the people of Germantown. Now, 10 years later, if 100 people still lived in Germantown, but the average size of the family shrunk to 4, you would need 5 additional houses, and your population didn't change by a single person. That is what we are seeing on a massive regional scale. And just the shrinking size of the average family alone leads the Hudson Valley to need thousands upon thousands of new housing units just to maintain the same 2.4 million population that we've had for the past 30 years. In this chart, what you can see here in Columbia County, you've had a little bit of population shrinkage, but your average household size has dropped by more than 1/10 of a person. What that means is you actually have more households despite having fewer people, and that alone drives the demand for an additional 600 to 700 units of housing by itself. So when people come up to you and ask about the need for housing, rural character, other things like that, help them understand that if you don't get on board for a modest amount of more additional housing, you are voting for population shrinkage, you are voting for workforce shrinkage, you are taking money out of the till of your local business because there will not be as many people around year round to spend money and be patrons and customers of that local business. You have to be careful about understanding the math, understanding the needs, and making sure at the very least you're producing enough housing to keep your population steady. Now, the other thing that really affects Columbia County is you have seen a proportionally gigantic increase in the number of people living in your county and working primarily from home. And this may not be breaking news to you. They are not working from home in jobs that are located in Columbia County. They are working from home in jobs that are based mostly in the New York City metro area. We can see that in the data. But you now have, as a proportion of the total workforce living in your county full time, the second largest proportion of work from home folks in the entire region, 16%. So nearly 1 out of every 5, it's close to 1 out of every 6 people you meet in your county who are working people are working primarily from home. That's up from 7% only about 7 years ago. Real quick, couple last things. We've showed you this in the past. Births are down. We've showed you school populations are down significantly. There are 48,000 fewer kids in our public schools in the Hudson Valley now than 20 years ago. Of those 48,000, Columbia County is responsible for 6,000. There are about 6,000, a little more than 6,000 fewer children in Columbia County public schools than just 20 years ago. This also portends a shrinking labor force. I showed these data before. We have Columbia in green on the same chart here. Columbia is on the left. Together, a decrease in more than 7,000 infants, children, and teens, an increase in 9,000 senior citizens over the age of 60, a loss of 7,100 mid-career professionals in what we call the mid-career donut hole, where people in their 30s, 40s, and early 50s are just shrinking in number because some of these generational cohorts are smaller, and some of those people have out-migrated from the region. So we really, as we talk about housing, we need to think about, where does the future labor force come from? Where does the year-round customer base come from? People are the fuel of a consumer economy. And I will tell you, those of you who own a local business know how difficult February can be. You gotta have full-time people living in the region for those Februaries. This is a different representation of what Chris shared. These are very granular data that I had DOL send me on a special data request. You can see here, just as Chris showed, this is based on the number of jobs from the top to the bottom in Columbia County. Pay special attention to the ones where the median wage is less than 50% of the AMI. I like to say that because that means even if 2 people working in that job live together, they're still not going to make it. It's going to be very, very difficult in your county. And this accounts for some of your biggest growth industries, some of your biggest employment sectors. Very, very important that the future of a lot of industry sectors you care about and a lot of your neighbors you care about depend on building some more housing. Last two things quick. I harped on this at our housing conference this year. We are seeing pockets of really, really excellent progress across the Hudson Valley on downtown revitalization, housing development, public realm and public space redevelopment, things that all sort of, when you blend them together, end up being part of this really incalculable vibrancy thing that we talk about. When you sit down and look at the places that are having success, the one thing they all have in common is a very active local government. A local government that has decided to take a very, very active role in setting the conditions for development, in going out and talking to developers, in pursuing grants and incentives, in taking property they might own and putting it out into the development world with certain strings attached. And I'll just go through this list quickly. The ones that are having the most success are changing their zoning. They're matching their zoning to modern patterns of development. They're focusing often on form instead of use. We can talk about that another time, but focusing on what the buildings look like and how big they can be and what the building materials are rather than what goes inside them. They're thinking about how the fact that successful communities have room enough for ample housing and ample conserved space, open space, and that those two things are not mutually exclusive. Some places are creating a countywide census of municipally owned properties that could be utilized through a request for expressions of interest process. I think that's something that should be at the top of Columbia County's to-do list. We are seeing more communities that own municipal property that is not parkland, but is downtown property, other properties. Put those properties out into the development world and say, dear developers, we would like to see you come here to build X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C. Send us your ideas, and the one we like the best, we will award the property to. I have just completely oversimplified the RFEI process, but it's worth learning about. Counties providing technical assistance to towns, local option credits for first-time buyers, phasing in taxes, having staff create a list of these and distribute them. There's so many local option tax credits and tax tools, including the one that was just passed this year for nonprofits selling homes to first-time buyers of low and moderate income. I'm happy to say that was a Columbia County Habitat and Pattern collaboration that led to that legislation being passed in Albany this year. Grayfields and brownfields doing BOA designations, building where we've already had development, stepped up building inspection of dilapidated properties, and frankly, really going after people who have used your communities as tax write-offs and saying it ain't going to happen anymore, getting those properties into people who want to put them into productive use, HCR and ESD funds. Chris, someone will talk about citizen philanthropy, property purchases, donations, community-led development, infrastructure. Please make sure community septics are part of your thinking. I'm hearing a lot of small communities talk about big packaged sewer plants they wish they had. Community septics, there's a couple of them in Greene County. There's one in Ulster County. You should really look at it as a solution for some of your smaller places where you'd like to see a little density. I'm going to skip my lecture on mindset just to say we need to make sure we're in a growth and vibrancy mindset and not every project that comes to our community being in the mindset of how do we shut it down, slow it down, or cut it in half. We do not have time anymore for shut it down, slow it down, and cut it in half. That has resulted in a lot of our key economic metrics shutting down, slowing down, and cutting in half. And the last thing I want to do is just give you a preview. Pattern was very fortunate to be one of 30 grantees nationwide for a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grant. There were 1,900 applicants. There were 30 awardees. We were one of them. And what we wanted to do is do the first ever in New York, the first ever data research project on corporate home ownership. This is large companies, investment groups coming in, buying up our housing, renting it back to us, turning it into short-term rentals. We're going to finish this project around the end of the year. At our housing conference, we shared some of the initial data findings, which you can see on the screen here. We are seeing, you know, a large amount of this, higher than the nationwide average in some of our small cities and what I would call our tourism towns, our sort of rural, you know, tourism towns, places where you want to go stay somewhere beautiful. We happen to be it, right? So here on the map, you can see some of the hotspots across the region that just have high percentage of parcels owned by corporate entities, single family, two family, three family, and four family parcels. I want to share this my last slide here. These are Airbnbs, entire unit Airbnbs. So this is not just like an open bedroom in a house. This is an entire house or an entire apartment. You can see here where some of the highest percentages of the overall housing stock is in Airbnbs. We are going to create for the first time ever a comprehensive comprehensive database of short-term rentals. Greene County is going to be included, so it will be a six county area. But suffice to say, some of these numbers are very high. And then when you look at the number of those short-term rentals that are owned as part of a portfolio, where the owner of that short-term rental owns more than one, you can see some of your communities in Columbia County have that. And when you start to own more than one, when you own two, when you own three, we had one investor who owns 28 in the region, you're a business, right? You're commercializing housing stock that used to be available to people who lived and work in our communities. And that reduces the stock, it drives up the price, and it turns housing into an investment instead of shelter. And these are some of the things that we need to wrestle with as a region, as a state, as a county, as we start to see some of these factors, second homes, short-term rentals, corporate ownership, as we see them coming into the region with more money, all cash purchases, 5, 10, 15% over the asking price, driving the market up and out of reach for our neighbors, we do need to start asking questions about what does regulation look like? When is it appropriate? How do we make sure that the equity in our homes and in our land is not being vacuumed into other places by big corporate buyers? And that conversation needs to be based in data that up till now has not existed. And we're happy to be the ones that are going to provide those data for the first time to this region so we can have a conversation that's based on facts instead of based on innuendo. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm going to stay on. If folks have questions at the end, as you know, I'm always happy to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. As always, a lot to think about, a lot to worry about, and a lot to hope for. It usually covers all the bases. Right. Our next speaker is Kevin O'Connor. Kevin is the CEO of RUPCO and has been for, I think, 23 years now, Kevin, just about. RUPCO has been pretty much the 800-pound gorilla in the world of affordable housing in the Hudson Valley region for about 40 years now, a little over 40 years. We were really excited to, I think, deepen the relationship with RUPCO here in Columbia County. When I started the work on the Wellness Hub in Greenport was already pretty well underway. Kevin answered an 11th hour call to be our partner for the +1 ADU program. A story that I'll never get tired of telling, but I don't think we have the time for it tonight. Poke me if you see me somewhere in the world. And subsequently, RUPCO has become our local program administrator for the vacant rental improvement program, which we'll hear a little bit more about later. And hopefully our partner on a great many other things. I was very happy that earlier this year, Kevin lifted the embargo that he placed on his staff from speaking to me. Just too many project pitches in too short an amount of time. But happy to have you here tonight, sir. Hoping to pick your brain a little bit about the challenges and the challenges of developing affordable housing, full stop, and then specifically in rural areas. If you've got any kind of overarching intro about that you'd like to make, we're all ears, and then I've got a few questions for you as well.
Sure. Well, first off, congratulations to Columbia County. You guys have done a lot of work in a lot of different areas, getting all your communities lined up for pro-housing and having a land trust, having a land bank, and some of the other efforts. Really, it's good work. Development is tough. It's challenging on all fronts. And Costs, which have been the latest addition to the realm of challenges, has been difficult. But, in smaller towns, rural areas, the lack of alignment between zoning, water, and sewer. Adam has mentioned the community. We're looking at doing some, more community septic, but it just doesn't, it's a very small map if you try to have all three. And increasingly now we're being advised we have to make sure we have electric capacity as well, which is not always everywhere. I think, the challenge of building affordable housing at a scale that rural communities want to accept and endorse is generally smaller. And, the most prevalent funding source we have for multifamily housing is the tax credit, a low-income housing tax credit. And, today it wants to fund projects at around, 60, 70 units. The 4% wants to fund a minimum of 100 and really is looking to fund 200 units at a time. So looking forward to Madeline, talking about some of the funding sources that the state has had for smaller projects, but it can be challenging. And then look, the Hudson Valley is gorgeous. It's a beautiful place. People, are attracted here and, are resistant to change. Change is difficult on all fronts for mostly everyone. And so, changing the bucolic small town and other descriptive words that we describe the Hudson Valley is difficult for folks. So we get that, but I think today we also, really keenly understand that we need more housing. We need more affordable housing. And so I think those are some of the basic challenges in small and rural areas.
I think, Adam touched on some of those challenges, and I think some of these are pretty well-trod territory for folks who have attended the task force meetings or previous forums. But some of the ways that local communities and local governments can help, I think are relatively fresh, and some of them are pretty novel. Are there 2 or 3 of the strategies that Adam outlined that you think are the most helpful from your point of view as a developer?
Yeah, I used to say all the time that, small towns need to get their house in order, so to speak. And it's difficult because there's, limited capacity at the town level. But towns should have comp plans, and they can be expensive. $500,000 can be spent on a comprehensive plan. They should look at their zoning, and many towns have not looked at zoning for 20 or 30 years. There's plenty of updates that zoning, if updated, could affect, that could help affordable housing. People should look at the special ordinances and concerns that they might have associated with the town, sometimes slopes or some other things. I think investing in infrastructure, I'm told that some of the sewer updates that are needed across the whole Hudson Valley could be in the billions of dollars. And so I think Adam's correct that we have to look at some alternatives to that. But anytime we can invest in infrastructure through grants and what have you, I think for a while, infrastructure investments were avoided because people knew that that would attract development, and that may not have been what they want. I think, I'm a big fan of Pattern. I like the fact that they're a regional organization. They promote regionalism, and I love the fact that they can produce the kind of reports and the kind of data. So towns that really know their population, their housing market, their incomes, their jobs, the salaries are going to be in a better place to inform and attract the right kinds of and the right size projects. Towns can do a lot with taxes. So we can reach, 30% AMI and 40% AMI if that's desired. We can do that. It's going to lower the amount of perm debt that the project can support and require additional subsidy. But one of the things that towns can do is to work with the tax base. When we did Woodstock Commons and opened up in 2013, it was one of the first intergenerational campuses, 10 units. We had 20 senior units and 32 units for people of any age. Of the 20 senior units, we had 10 that were set to 30% AMI. And in January of 2013, the rent was $300 a month for those seniors. And we could do that. And we had a pilot with the town. And we think that I've always said to towns, look, if there's money at the federal or state level, we'd like to bring it here. Otherwise it'll go to Wyoming or Binghamton. But if the state of New York is going to give you 15 million or 20 million to build affordable housing in your town, I think it might be reasonable for the town to consider some tax break because they deem this to be important. And so those are some of the things that I think, pro-housing was on the list, but you've already checked that box.
Well, I mean, your answers really help, I think, crystallize some things, that the fact that there's $5 million available to pro-housing certified communities, and by the time this grant application is due, we should all be certified. So that's 23 municipalities that are looking for ways to spend the state's money. One of the things that came up both during my too long introduction and Adam's comments was the role of philanthropy, so local altruism, local wealth, whether those resources are actual cash dollars or land donations. You've got kind of a unique project happening in, I think it's Pine Hill with the Wellington Hotel. Could you talk a little bit about what you know about how that came together and what RUPCO's role is there?
Sure. The story there is, we have worked a little bit more at scale. Our approach is generally to work with communities, not in communities. We don't roll with one thing. We look for a well-articulated need, which is almost everywhere, and we look for local energy, something that we can attract to. We really started as a Ulster County agency 45 years ago next year. But a long time ago, we broke the bounds of Ulster County. We're working really in like 6 counties in the Mid-Hudson Valley. So finding energy is something to attract to. We've actually sold a couple of our smaller 8, 10, or 12 unit projects in the last couple of years, just because it's more difficult to handle the maintenance. And we were trying to take on some bigger projects. I left the city of Newburgh one morning to drive up to meet Jan Jaffe in Pine Hill with the full intention to say, good luck, but right now we can't possibly get involved with a small project. And then I met Jan, and she is a tour de force all by herself. A group of citizens that Jan led, the Wellington Blueberry folks, they raised $600,000 to buy the former Wellington Hotel. It had been purchased by someone and for the last 20 years sort of run into the ground. An historic building that Jan got listed through her connections on the National Historic Trust, one of the 11 most important buildings to save in the country. And here was an opportunity, a quintessential example of a former, an historic building that was the Wellington Hotel in a small hamlet, sitting vacant, that could be brought back in a useful purpose. They had looked at a hotel use for a little bit. That proved difficult. They settled on workforce housing. They called us. We went, we visited, and because of who and what they were, the project that they had, we said yes. And it's unquestionably, it's an award-winning project. We've been able to attract dollars. We're very excited to be involved with a group of local citizens who took the bull by the horns and again raised $600,000, bought this building, and it's on its way to have a little bit of a food retail on the first floor, small grocery store, and 10 workforce housing units at the foot of one of the state's major attractions, Bel Air Ski Resort.
And that all came together. My understanding of that is that all came together in about 2.5 years, which is relatively quick in this world.
Yeah. Well, I think Jan was knocking on the door for a while before I got up there myself. And so there was that period of time. And I think we've been working now maybe 1.5 years on putting some of the funding together. But yeah, we have local approvals, for the project, and we're working through some final due diligence, and there might be one more funding source to secure, and we'll be into construction.
Hey, Chris,
right,
can I just underscore something about that I think is really relevant? I put something in the chat. I mean, that's in a town of 2,900 people, folks. So when you think about scale, think about rural context. I mean, this is a project in a town that's similar to some of your towns, but also what Jan did and what Jan's going to do with help from Kevin is something all of you could do, which is find a building that used to be something where people go, oh, remember when that was blah, 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 and it hasn't been blah, blah, blah in decades. Instead of looking at it as a scar on the landscape, look at it as an opportunity, right? And it's that kind of creativity and then building community philanthropy behind it that's led it to Kevin and his team at RUPCO to give it new life, not only on behalf of that building, but new life on behalf of the community. I think it's a really important lesson.
Well, I am now going to get 12 emails about the Rojan School tomorrow. So thank you, Adam.
Mhm.
You're welcome.
Last question for you, Kevin, before we switch over to Madeline. There are a lot of folks on this call who aren't government officials, who aren't developers, who don't have land to offer, who don't have a certain amount of wealth to donate. So for just folks in the community, what do you think is the one thing that would be most important for them to be able to contribute to getting more housing built in the county?
I think, starting a conversation, showing up at town boards, speaking to it's election season, when people are coming around, the candidates, ask them what their position is on affordable housing. There are different initiatives out there. Family of Woodstock has started a shared housing group that is, I think, a unique opportunity for some to find housing. Steve Rosenberg and Rebecca Crimmins started an alliance of conservation and affordable housing to try to bring together folks that are inclined to want to make sure that we're protecting important land with the idea of let's also produce affordable housing. And so I think we have to be intentional. And in my track of being at this job since 2002, I think a lot of the people I met early on were, I came to the Hudson Valley. This is how my family got here. We got here some this way or that way, and we love it, and we don't really want it to change. And today, the conversation is, my kid just graduated from college, and he wants to come back here, but he can't afford to buy a house. Or my parents would love to downsize, and can't find affordable rental. Or my sister, or me, or my neighbor, or my friend. People are really, it's more personal. The challenge of finding and sustaining affordable housing. So I think there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of data, and I think it starts with conversation and speaking to town officials and stepping up. You too can be a leader, so go for it.
Well, thank you, sir. I'll call you with a couple project ideas tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, third in our program, Madeline Fletcher from New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Madeline is the Vice President of Small and Mid-Sized Development, but much more importantly, I met Madeline about 10, 11, 12 years ago. Madeline is one of the first wave of land bankers in New York State. She was the Executive Director of the Newburgh Community Land Bank. I think some people would say she's now ascended to the state. I think it's a lateral move to go from running a land bank to the state, but that's just me. And Madeline's here to talk to us tonight about some of the programs that the state offers that do make sense for rural communities, and a couple of successes that there have already been around the state. And I've got your slides here if you'd like me to drive for you.
Sure. Yeah, that works. Thanks. So thanks everybody. I'll try to go pretty quickly. We just wanted to do, sort of quick overview of the programs that we have that, seem to be working reasonably well in smaller communities upstate. So I'll talk about a couple of our rental programs quickly, and then also about our bigger homeownership push, sort of where we are. Happy to try to leave plenty of time for you guys to have questions for me and for Kevin and Adam. So the first two rental programs I'll talk about are our small buildings participation loan program, which is super low, ultra low interest lending, interest only. And then our SURDI program, our small rental development initiative, which is a grant program for nonprofits. And then on homeownership, I'll talk about our AHOP program, our Affordable Homeownership Opportunity Program. I'll touch briefly on the home buyer development program, as well as our most recent program, Move In. I'll also talk for a second on the rental side about VRIP, which I didn't get a chance to make a slide for, but I know it's very interesting to lots of folks. So super quickly, I know it's a lot of text, but the Small Building Participation Loan Program, we call the PLP. And this is a rental program that can be used for rehab or new construction. It's a pretty deep subsidy. It's $150,000 per unit across upstate. And actually now this, depending on construction type and affordability, is no longer relevant. We've made it all sort of the maximum subsidy. We used to sort of differentiate between affordability levels and stuff like that, but it's $150,000 per unit for projects that are 5 to 50 units. That is like a legislative limit on the 50 units. So we're not really, so it's really geared for stuff that is just too small for tax credits, for bond financing, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely designed to be a streamlined program. We work with a senior lender, typically that is CPC, the Community Preservation Corporation, who's an affordable housing development lender, though we can work with other lenders. And we work with them to invest into their funds, into their construction and permanent loan, into their construction loan. So they administer construction throughout the process. You're not having to deal with a bank and the agency with multiple inspections, multiple disbursement requests, all that kind of stuff. It's streamlined so that you're just sort of interfacing during construction with the lender. And then we make a permanent loan that is paid interest only for the life of the loan. We charge only 0.5% interest, and that's through the entirety of the project. We do have a 30-year affordability period, and we look for an average affordability of 80% AMI, though within any project, we allow a little bit of variation. So any individual unit can go up to 120% of AMI, as long as you're creating some balance to achieve that average. You can have a bunch of different incomes in any given project. And to make sure that folks are, in New York City, projects have, 40,000 applications for like a single unit. We don't have that sort of demand for our homes. So we do create a bit of a marketing band. So if you have a home that's affordable at say 80% AMI, you can rent to a household that's up to 90% AMI. And that offers people a little less housing burden in terms of their sort of monthly incomes, and ensures that you're able to like cast a kind of wider net to make sure you're able to fill units. Just to flag, I put the website here. Our term sheet is there. Any other info that might be useful. We don't apply our agency design guidelines to this program. Plan review, all of that stuff is happening with the partner lender that we're working with. We are nearly committed in terms of our current allocation of funds, that we're hoping that, as we look ahead, we've done a lot of great work. I'll show an example next, but we're hoping that we'll sort of, keep this going. It's already been funded in two 5-year housing plans. So we anticipate it'll continue. The next slide is just an example of a project that we were able to fund. It's called the Smith in Syracuse. It's a really interesting adaptive reuse project. Of course, right, something like the Wellington is a little smaller scale, and I think is going to be better for our SURDI program that we're going to talk about next. But just to give you an idea, I think there is a lot of adaptive reuse that happens in the Hudson Valley. We have other projects in the Hudson Valley. This is just a particularly lovely project that we were able to use historic tax credits. So that was a really great source of funding, a great source of developer fee. We typically don't pay much of a developer fee in our program. and, gets affordable housing, again, like I think what Adam was saying, a building that's been sitting sort of seen as like something that detracts from the community, but really can be made into an asset. I think this is a really great way to use this program. We can go on to the next program, Surety. Similarly, the small rental development initiative is geared towards smaller projects. Again, not something that the agencies traditionally had a ton of funding for, but this is, I think we just got our 4th allocation of funding in this year's budget. It went up from $7 to $10 million. And the way that we operate this program is really as a grant program for nonprofits. We are fine with joint partnerships, but we really want, community development, affordable housing projects being driven by nonprofits in different neighborhoods. And this is even smaller scale. So legislatively, this is these projects are capped at 20 units. They can be mixed use, of course, commercial on the ground floor, residential above, anything like that is great. This can also work for adaptive reuse. It can work for preservation, so things that are occupied and in need of repair, as well as new construction. So anything that sort of needs doing in your community can be done. And we do things as small as 4 units. I'll show you a picture next. And then all the way up, we do 20-unit projects. I'll skip all this detail about what's fundable and not. All to say our maximum awards are $2 million. And we base our per unit potential maximum on whatever the published home per unit is annually. You can go to the next slide. Just a couple of examples. One in the Hudson Valley called Harlow Row. It's in Poughkeepsie. It's owned by Hudson River Housing. So we're working on this one right now. It was awarded funds, I think in 2024 or 25. So we should close on that and it should be ready to start construction soon. And again, this is just sort of an old out of date building that they've owned and have been trying to sort out for a while. They'll have 8 apartments as well as 4 storefronts. So we don't fund the storefronts, but we'll combine, we're happy to combine our funding with anything else that's available. And the other one is just sort of an example that shows just how small scale would go. This is 4 apartments above commercial space out in Jefferson County. And this just finished, this is obviously a before, but this just finished construction and we're working sort of toward occupancy and closeout. Okay, the next slide. I'll just say quickly on VRIP, Chris, I know before I start talking about homeownership, I know you mentioned that earlier. I touched base with Crystal Loeffler, who heads up the Office of Community Renewal. She mentioned that the most recent round of awards should be coming out soon, and then they'll immediately release a new round of open round for applications. So for anyone that's curious, VRIP program is really targeted toward helping property owners who have vacant rental units that are sort of not occupied, are not in condition to be occupied or not sort of marketable for condition issues to sort of upgrade their apartments. And I think you can receive awards from $50,000 to $75,000 at 80% or I think 65 or 60% of AMI. So the higher the amount of subsidy you use, the higher the subsidy, the lower the income for the folks that you're housing. And the way that that program works is allocations are made to groups like Kevin's for a specific geography, and then they find and work with property owners who are looking to make these improvements. So rather than the agency directly dealing with scores of homeowners, we work with our trusted partners who know their neighborhoods best and can identify folks who need to upgrade units and make housing available that exists but is otherwise not in use. Our AHOP program, Affordable Homeownership Opportunity Program, is really we've created this program out of a $400 million allocation. Again, we are flying through this money. It's been so exciting to see, how many different kinds of projects have been interested in creating homeownership. We are doing things in Keene, New York, up in the North Country. We're doing things in Buffalo. We're doing things in the Bronx. We're doing, we're doing 125 unit co-op condos, we're doing 100 unit co-ops, and we're doing, super tiny home projects. So just a couple of images that I thought would be useful. The rendering, the sort of Cape style rendering is the Keene project that we did in the North Country. I have a little example later in the presentation, but this is like an example of, in a small town, in a developable area of the Adirondack Park Agency. These are small houses under 1,000 square feet, and really sort of in small scale, because again, there's only small sort of pockets of areas that you can develop in the Adirondack Park area. And then on the right is a Kearney project where we partially funded a larger townhome project. So we created, I think, 9 sort of townhomes in a really high-performing school district area in northern Westchester. So a couple of different sort of things that I thought, kind of relevant to, Columbia County and the surrounds. Here, next slide. Just sort of nuts and bolts quickly. We're looking to fund primarily new construction, though we will do adaptive reuse, we're doing a couple of adaptive reuse like condo projects and things like that, depending on in different areas of the state. In Syracuse, we're doing some adaptive reuse, in the city as well, but mostly new construction. I would say overall upstate, mostly single family or townhouse style developments. And we will invest up to $200,000 per unit for homes that are affordable at 80% AMI. We are also now able to invest a little bit more when you're able to, we'll give you up to $20,000 additional dollars if you can meet a net zero ready or a passive house standard. And we're also actually in the process of finalizing some plans to additionally invest funds over and above that. Even where you're not reaching passive or net zero, we're going to be able to enhance the $200,000 with some funding for heat pumps and solar panels and stuff like that. So even if you're not able to make the threshold, we're going to soon be able to add a little bit more value to that $200,000 as well. We have a 30-year regulatory period, but depending on a community's goals, we can do a resale restriction of 10 years at the same AMI level. And then after 10 years, you're able to sell it to anybody, and we do a small recapture of the appreciation. Or in some places that are using tools like community land trust, or really that want to create predictable long-term affordability, we are able to, we'll put a resale restriction in place for 30 years. So that's something that's like a conversation we're having in different communities. The profit is earned not through how much you can sell something for, but through an underwritten developer fee. So we're basically determining the sale price or approximating the sale price at the time we underwrite the project, based on the AMI, based on expected taxes and insurance prices in your community. So we're sort of really trying to hone in on exactly really what that looks like in individual communities. You can next slide. So this, I already talked about this, so I'll kind of go through it quickly, but we did, I think, kind of applicable in a rural place, that might not have, like Kevin was talking about, infrastructure. You might not have infrastructure to build, 50 houses, but you might have it to build 4, right? You can extend something, infrastructure that exists in a small neighborhood or pocket area, So in this area, we were able to do 4 homes. They were near the center of town. It was a small developable site, which I said in the Adirondack Park is very hard to find. And these homes chose to have slightly less subsidy and enable cast a wider net in terms of affordability. So these are regulated at 100% of AMI. They were able to control costs really well by using modular construction. They used a company called Simplex Homes, and the homes are placed on a community land trust. So they will be permanently affordable, even beyond our 30 years. They all have a 99-year ground lease that'll restrict resale. And in that way, we're also, we're recording against the land. We're securing, like we're doing a secured note and mortgage against the land. So the land trust will sort of oversee future sales and that kind of thing over time. But the the home purchasers will also sign an unsecured note that'll just sort of incentivize them to sort of, kind of keep with the restrictions over time. I can go to the next slide. I just a little bit about the math, I don't know if anyone wants to go into it, but I just wanted to kind of show sort of, how it all comes together. These 4 houses cost about $1.4 million to build all together. When they sell for, they sold a little under $200,000, that paid back the construction loan, it paid back the equity, and it paid back the developer fee. And then our funds, again, stay in long term. It's just a method of regulating the properties. We don't actually want to be paid back. We just want the homes to be affordable. You can go to the next slide. I thought I'd talk a little bit about our new move-in program, Move in New York. This is about a program designed to sort of build the market for cross mod homes, which are manufactured factory-built homes built to HUD's code, but with sort of that can be appraised as a site-built home. They feature sort of architectural qualities of a stick-built home, and you're able to get sort of financing as you would a stick-built home. So it's sort of bringing together sort of the efficiency of manufactured housing with sort of a neighborhood appropriate style. And so we just have put out 2 different RFPs. One is a procurement to identify builders of these homes who can guarantee a certain amount of production. So our goal is to hopefully site as many as 200 of these homes over the next year or so. And then the other RFP is to identify communities, nonprofits, land banks that would like to sort of partner with the home builders that are identified to start placing homes in their, sort of existing neighborhoods in their sort of little communities. So this could work rural or urban, but very much looking at, infill in places that, are already places, right? You're close to amenities and that kind of thing. And we think this can achieve, I can go to the next slide, maybe. Okay, so we think this can achieve, pushing 50%, maybe 40% savings over the cost of what we're seeing right now. And we also think the timelines can be like super shortened. You can have, from start to finish, in 6 months or something, you can have a bunch of houses, whereas, that could take, up to a couple of years at this point with stick built. So just quickly, I think I touched most of this, but eligible applicants can be municipalities, land banks, or nonprofit housing organizations. We really are focused on seeing that the municipalities are supportive of the application. So there is a resolution request, and we are looking as much as possible for 10 or more homes in existing neighborhoods. So, potentially that could be in 2 different areas in a community or something like that. But we're really looking for volume, because volume brings cost savings, time efficiencies, and that kind of thing. And this will be dispersed as a non-interest bearing, non-amortizing, partially forgivable loan. So we'll basically advance the cost of building the house, and then whatever can't be recaptured in the actual sale will be forgiven to the developer of the homes. So if you build a house, it costs, $280,000 all in, you sell it for 200, we would forgive that $80,000. And we'll have some resale restrictions and that kind of thing. And this will be a little bit higher income. We're looking for a range between like 70 and 130, probably averaging around 100% of AMI. So pushing incomes a little higher. Okay. I think I covered this all already. We can go on to the.
You want to go to the last one?
What's that?
You want me to go to the last one? There's only one left.
Yeah.
All right.
That's fine. Okay, great. So the home buyer development program, I just want to touch on this in case folks are not aware of it. This is home funding. It still exists. The home program is still out there. This is for really small projects, right? So we're doing all different kinds of small projects, and this is for the really, really small 4 units, 4 homes or less. Up to $1 million per project, so about $250,000 per home. And this is an grant funding through our federal home program. I have to confess, I'm not sure if it is open right now, but it's definitely something to look at on our website. If you have, homes in your community, it can be substantial rehab. It can also be new construction. We're looking, again, single family. We have home ownership design standards that apply to this program, to AHOP, to some of our other home ownership programs. And, at the end, it's sold to a home eligible buyer, which is 80% of AMI or less, without a marketing band in this case. I think that covers it. I know we're sort of running low on time, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. That's a lot of information. So now a lot of folks on the call know how, at least if not how the sausage is made, at least how much it costs and what's for sale at the housing shop in this tortured metaphor. So technically, officially, we've got about 6 minutes left. I guess it's up to some of our panelists and perhaps the chairman if we run a little bit over. If anyone's got any questions they'd like to throw out, feel free to raise your hand. There is one in the Q&A that I will read. Is creating a county housing authority that could build apartments worth considering? I think with the degree of housing pressures that Adam outlined and that we're all pretty well aware of, I think almost anything is worth considering. Once you really start to have those conversations, you have to really talk about, well, how are you going to fund these things, right? One of the issues that you run into in rural areas is that we don't benefit from economies of scale, and that works both ways. So things like countywide housing authorities that would really depend on really public tax dollars is one of the main ways that they're funded. That's going to be a tough sell for communities where we're already kind of hard pressed to raise additional local funds. It looks like Adam wants to weigh in with.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and Madeline might have some good knowledge on this as well. There's 1 or 2 counties in the region I'm aware of that have development corporations as part of the county government, but they've kind of long been dormant. I know at least one county's kind of trying to start to think about whether theirs should be brought back to life, especially in the context of developing properties that are already owned by the government potentially. But I'm not aware of any that are super active and applying for the sorts of funds Madeline's outlined, and on top of that, acting as the developer also. Madeline, you're probably not aware of any either, right?
Not really. I think, most of our grant programs and stuff like that, we're seeing nonprofit applicants, now more and more land bank applicants. But yeah, not a ton of municipal activity.
And the one I'm mentioning, Chris, is a county that's like the highest population density in the region, so it's not analogous to Columbia County.
It's a nice problem to have. Okay, we got 2 new ones here. One is, what's the most common zoning change you see at the small town level? So, Robert, is this a change that's already been made or a change that's recommended?
Hi, change that's recommended. Like I've heard about density changes are common.
I think that, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Adam. You've got more.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, Kevin mentioned this effort that Steve and Rebecca are leading, the Hudson Valley Alliance for Housing and Conservation, and I'm, working hand in hand with them on that. We're doing the pilot project in New Lebanon. And one of the things, we're seeing really 2 things. One is, first off, having a community conversation about the places you love and want to conserve and preserve. Off of that, having a conversation about the places where you want to build, what you want to build, what it should look like, and how dense it should be. And some of that's dictated by infrastructure availability. Some of it's just dictated by what you want and where you want it. And having that conversation, we're seeing more communities have conversations like that. And then from there, you can begin to match your zoning up to what your infrastructure will be able to hold. Some of the larger communities, as I mentioned, are looking at, zoning codes that care more about form than use. So rather than saying you can do residential here and industrial over there and commercial over there, and those three things never shall touch ever, they're more saying, hey, let's let the buildings be this size. They have to look like this. They have to have these architectural features. They have to use these building materials and do with inside the building whatever you want. Now, I know that sounds like way, way, way different for those who are used to what sort of traditional zoning, but it really unlocks the development potential in the places where you decide you want building to be located. So yes, increasing density a little where there's infrastructure to do it, and then thinking about your code differently. Remember, zoning is only a tool that restricts. Zoning doesn't allow anything. Zoning is only a tool that restricts what you can do. It's not a tool that allows or promotes anything. So make sure you're not restricting the things you want. That's the simple part of it.
Thank you.
I think this probably is best for Madeline. Price per acre of land is prohibitive. Are there any subsidies or grants for land purchase? Madeline, some of the programs that you outlined and some other programs that the state offers, acquisition is an eligible use, correct?
Yeah, in general, acquisition is an eligible use. I'm sure in Columbia County, how expensive land is, even with our subsidies, would make it difficult. We have seen in some places, specifically in Westchester, where the cost of land has sort of, is also prohibitive, that the county itself has been sort of putting together some funds to just focus on acquisition, to kind of remove that from sort of as a barrier. So, and again, I would say also, like, the work of land banks, sort of in that sort of acquisition, making land available inexpensively. But yes, certainly in the Hudson Valley, we struggle with that. But yeah, to the extent you can make it work, it is an eligible expense for our funds, for sure.
I will say that's kind of one of the unconventional approaches of our land bank, but I think it's pretty prevalent with the rural land banks. Land banks in New York State started out as nonprofits that would take on really distressed buildings and get them back online, get them back under productive use. In rural areas, vacant land is oftentimes a much more viable path. And that seems to be the path that our land bank is heading toward. I've got one question of my own for each of Adam and Madeline. For Adam, you didn't say it tonight, but I know it's one of your favorite things on your most recent leg of your never-ending speaking tour. What is the biggest myth about housing in the Hudson Valley?
So if anyone comes to your meeting and says we can't build more housing because we can't afford to have kids in the schools, just don't listen to them. All right. That's the biggest myth going. We should be on our knees praying for a hailstorm of children to fall from the sky. I don't know when the Hudson Valley became so anti-kid. It's one of the weirder things going on out there. But for the sake of workforce, for the sake of a future workforce, a future customer base, for the sake of not having to close more school buildings, we've closed 53 of them already, folks. Like, we need a whole bunch of kids in our communities. I live in one of the few communities in Ulster County that has a lot of kids in it still. And the best thing about living here is the kids get together like little gangs of little humans. They ride their bikes around, they torture people. It's great. We need kids. So don't let someone come to your community and say, we can't afford to have kids in the schools. It's one of the more ridiculous lines going on around the region. And it's factually inaccurate.
Thank you.
I would actually sort of say, the first thing I would say is very similar. I actually live in the city of Beacon in the Hudson Valley, where I moved about 15 years ago. And I moved there because it was, where I could afford a house at the time. But now it is absolutely insane. Me and my husband are public sector people, and we were looking for somewhere we could afford. And And now I see this, the same generation of people who did that, who moved to Beacon and who had family. I have my family here and my kids have gone through the schools and everything. And now I do see a lot of people in our, my same generation saying, we don't need any more development. There's no infrastructure and there's no resources and we can't afford it and da-da-da. And I say, well, where should we build if not in our cities, right? Like where should we build apartments? But here, where we have infrastructure, where we have water, we have everything. So I think it's definitely that NIMBY thing that always rings false to me. It's just sort of a protective of some ideal that doesn't really exist.
All right, I've got one last question, and it's for Madeline, but I'm not sure if you're in the correct position to answer it, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Given the statistics that I opened this meeting with that were both specific to Columbia County as an outlier among outliers, but also those, the 5 counties of the Mid-Hudson Valley region that have housing pressures that are similar to New York City. You mentioned a couple times when you were describing the programs that the state offers that, such and such is a legislative limit. This is a legislative limit. Who do we bother about changing the AMI limits for high-cost areas such as the one that we live in? Is that staff or is that electeds?
So that's a good question. I think it's a combination, right? So the number of units that we are working with is generally legislative. That's set by the state legislature, who says, $10 million for blah, 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 not to exceed 20 units or whatever. AMI wise, I would say it's a combination. I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head which program has a legislative AMI limit and which doesn't. But it's something that we talk about at the agency for sure. So you should certainly reach out to us when you have a concern or suggestion around that, because even if we're not in control of that, it's something that we could talk about when we're setting priorities or making requests and things like that. So I think HCR is definitely the place to start.
And Chris, these limits are all over the place and other things that affect housing. For example, a lot of the water and sewer infrastructure programs that are administered by the Environmental Facilities Corporation have their own limits that are subject to a totally separate hardship report that was just renewed recently, where the data are 3 years old and the process is messy and the legislators are not involved in that.
Yeah,
that is
that's
a
right.
agency level thing. And so these limits sort of are burrowed into a lot of different things, and you got to kind of dig them up and constantly show people how they're using different data from different places, some of which are 2 or 3 years old and don't jive with the current metrics of need in the region. So it's a constant whack-a-mole of income limits.
All right, I think this might be the last question. I'm going to assume this is Supervisor Adams. Is there a better qualifier / indicator than AMI? Is that a question for all of us?
So good news. That's actually one of the projects in our independent research agenda this year, and we should have that out by December. Our team is working on that now. The answer is there's not a lot of them. None of them are perfect, but AMI is becoming less and less relevant as that fraction I told you about gets weirder and weirder, with the denominator increasing and the numerator stagnating.
I know that there was a white paper at one point circulating internally at HUD trying to get off of AMI. That's probably not going to go anywhere anytime soon. In this county, if you live here and you're concerned about housing, just generally housing issues, I think the one you might want to push for is AMI as a percentage of your median home sales price. Whatever, if that ratio is really out of whack, like it is in the 5 counties that we talked about right off the top, that ratio is a really good number to focus on. All right, Chairman Morell, I think we are at our limit for words.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll do this again and we'll continue to make progress.
Thanks for having us.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
And thanks
Adios.
for spending part of your Tuesday night with us.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.